Hi there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. I think all of us feel the pain when we go to the gas pump, right? The days of 85-cent gasoline are a long time ago. And frankly, this is something we all feel because even when the prices come back down, it's a lot of money. So, how would you feel if a neighboring state, which shall remain nameless, wanted to tax Idaho gasoline consumers because we don't refine our own gasoline and we have to import it from that state? Maybe closer to reality than you think. I've got details coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. My goal here today is not so much to get you fired up over a pending gas war between Utah and Idaho. Whoops, I guess I told you which state is looking to tax us. But there are alternatives, and hopefully we can explore some of the alternatives should Utah decide that, hey, we need tax revenue. Why don't we just tax whatever gas we export to our neighbors to the north? Now, Ron Nate from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, he's the president of the IFF, had this article back at the end of January. And if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to go to idahofreedom.org. Check it out for yourself. But Mad Max hits the Rockies. It's a gas war. All right. Well, let's see what our options are. Ron points out that this is kind of a weird twist on protectionism and trade battles, and that Utah could be the first state to turn to an export tax. Oops, sorry, that needs air quotes. Export tax on gasoline refined in Utah, but shipped out of state. And in Idaho, with exactly zero refineries of its own, we depend on Utah for refined gasoline for all of our south and eastern Idaho gas stations, with Washington and Montana refining gas for our north Idaho gas stations. So Idaho is a 100% importer of refined gasoline. That's the way it is. In fact, he says Idaho is the only Northwest state without an oil field or a refinery. Hadn't realized that. So we're uniquely captive to Utah refineries and the Utah legislature, who now want to shift their gasoline burden or their gasoline tax burden onto Idaho consumers. Now, if this is successful, it's just going to be a matter of time before other states selling to Idaho follow suit. Washington and Montana will likely be next in line to impose similar taxes. So what are our options here? I mean, I know everybody's spoiling for a fight. Well, we take up our arms and we get that gasoline. Well, let's consider some of the options, okay? First one is we lay down and we pay the tax. I mean, how big a deal could it be? A few cents here, a few cents there. It's only 24 to 38 cents per gallon. And with Idaho, at about 2.85 a gallon, that was at least the AAA data as of the end of January. What are a few more cents? Just a 14% increase is all, says Ron, sarcasm intended. Idaho House Speaker Mike Moyle suggested the cost could come to as much as $250 million for Idaho gasoline consumers. And again, this is not because we've done anything. We're not getting any representation in the Utah legislature for that. It's just, how can we squeeze somebody for a little extra money? I know that doesn't quite pass the sniff test, and probably not the option most people would choose to go with. Ron says, well, we could always send maybe a negotiating team. Maybe our governor and legislative leaders could traverse the desert and go talk some sense into Utah lawmakers. With no gasoline capabilities of our own, nothing for trade, and no army to speak of, it would be nothing like sending Trump to threaten Canada. More like tiny Mauritius negotiating with China for a super duper trade deal. There's just not much hope of getting the Utah general authorities to stand down. So negotiating with them, probably not. Now, we could always retaliate, though. That's an option. You want to soak Idaho for our gas? Well, wait till you see what we do with our potato and barley and sugar taxes. Now, that may sound like a strategy, but if you ask the Idaho potato, barley, and sugar farmers what they think of their products becoming RPGs in an intermountain trade war, yeah, they're probably not going to be too happy. As with most trade wars, the usual weapons are merely tools of self-inflicted harm. In other words, that would hurt Idaho farmers with the wish of hurting those outsiders trying to fleece us in Utah. We could sue the carrot snappers. Ron says the U.S. Constitution absolutely contemplated the dangers and follies of states battling one another in economic trade restrictions. That's why the Interstate Commerce Clause and Article 1, Section 10 were included. They didn't want the states fighting each other economically. These provisions specify keeping trade regular and impose prohibitions on states exacting tariffs and duties on one another. In other words, taxes across state lines were considered tariffs among the free, independent United States of America. That's going to make a few consolidationist heads explode, but please deal with it. Suing Utah may or may not be a win. It would probably take a while, and I agree with Ron on this one personally. I don't trust the courts either. Now, there is also another option here. We could cry foul. Of course, we think it's unfair for a neighboring state to impose a tax for the express purpose of collecting money from people who don't live in that state. Oh, wait. Actually, that's what some of Idaho's squishy legislators have been saying about why Idaho should maintain its grocery tax to collect money from those out-of-state tourists, right? They can afford it. Not much high ground for Idaho in that argument, and not much impact should be expected by saying, but they're being mean to us. So there is another alternative, and frankly, I think this is the one that we need to be looking at. We open our doors immediately. It would make sense for Idaho to remove any and all impediments for oil companies to relocate refineries into the gem state. Now, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how companies might want to get the heck out of Utah once the tax is dumped in their lap. We wouldn't see the results right away, but in the long term, Idaho could be the big winner here. And again, it's the idea that this is an opportunity. And if we don't have refineries of our own here, I mean, yes, well, we need the infrastructure, we need rails, we need pipelines. Well, we have rails and pipelines can be built, but what are we doing to keep those refineries out? And this is the crazy part. I know there are people who would say, well, but they stink. Where are we going to put it? I don't know. Pocatello? I mean, Simplot's already kind of competing for, the fragrance of the day there. So that's a joke, by the way, but it's not like we don't have spaces in which those could be placed. So here's how Ron summarizes things. He says, look, stay tuned. This could get interesting because for Utah to consider an export tax, that's new territory. And it'll be fascinating to see what, if anything, Idaho can do to mitigate the effects or to take advantage of an opportunity. Utah's trade folly, though, he says, could be Idaho's win if Idaho positions itself well to take on a new industry and welcome its first producers of gasoline. So keep calm and refine. That's actually very sound advice. And that's the free market approach. Instead of, well, we got to find some way to legally hamstring them and make them suffer. What if we just make it so attractive that someone would actually find it feasible and profitable to have a refinery here? Something to think about. And it would, of course, take some of the mischief out of the sails of those Utah legislators. Right. One last note here. This is Capital Clarity. It is coming up tomorrow, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Note, though, down at the bottom right-hand corner, this is in a different place than the Lincoln Auditorium at the state capitol. This will be in the garden level East Wing hearing room. That's EW 42. You'll be hearing talk about weather modification, mosquito abatement districts, and Representative Clint Hostetler will be there, Representative Lucas Kaler, also Representative Rob Beiswinger, all of them talking about things that I know some people think, oh, you're going to talk about weather modification. Is this some kind of tinfoil conspiracy? No, it's stuff that's been going on. It's really out in the open, but it's not well understood by a lot of people, which I guess is what leads people to think that it's just kooky stuff that nobody should be concerned about, except for the fact it's already going on. So maybe if you want to be a little bit better informed, Capital Clarity, you can find out more about it. Go to idahofreedom.org. And if you don't get a chance to show up in person, you can always check out the video of the live stream after the fact. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
that